A small house somewhere in Russia, right as the rest of the world is watching Tony Stark stand in front of the press to admit that he's Iron Man, Anton Vanko is on his deathbed watching it all happen with nothing but bitterness in his face. He turns to his son Ivan and gives him the only inheritance he has left, which is a story about what the Stark family took from them. Howard Stark stole their work, buried the Vanko name, and left them with nothing, while the Stark family became richer, more famous, and untouchable. Anton apologizes to his son, as the only thing he's leaving behind is his knowledge of arc reactors. Shortly after, his dad dies and Ivan is left in that house alone with his father's research, anger, and a very clear target. So he gets to work, studying his father's schematics and ends up building his own arc reactor, from scratch, with scraps. But he takes it even further beyond, building a rough mechanical harness with 2 electrical whips. Half a year later, Tony Stark is doing the most Tony Stark thing imaginable, jumping out of a plane above a packed stadium, flying through the air in the Iron Man suit, landing perfectly on stage, and soaking in the crowd like this is a concert, a tech demo, and a personal holiday all at once. He brings back the Stark Expo, the massive science exhibition that his father initially created, and he sells it as a celebration of innovation, technology, and future, with Tony standing at the center of it all like the very embodiment of legacy asked him to host. He plays an old recording of Howard Stark talking about the expo, and Howard describes it as a place where the best minds in the world could come together to build something better. Tony's at the top of the world, everything looks perfect. The suit, the crowd, the world sees him as a hero, but then Washington calls. Tony appears before a government committee where Senator Stern demands that he hands over the Iron Man suit to the military. He argues that the armor is a weapon that is too powerful to belong to one private citizen, especially when that private citizen is Tony Stark, a man who's never really been known for restraint. And of course, Tony rejects the entire argument immediately, telling them that the suit and he are one, which means that giving it up would be the same as giving them his own body, so the same as joining the military, basically. Rhodey's there too, and he gets pulled into the hearing because he wrote a report on Iron Man for the military. Rhodes tries to defend Tony by calling him a genuine American hero, but Stern starts to cherry-pick lines from his report to make it sound like even Tony's best friend thinks that he's a threat. But Tony can see what's happening, and instead of sitting there politely while they corner him, he pulls something up on the TV. Footage of different countries and weapons companies, also exposing the government's failed attempts to copy the Iron Man armor. Every single attempt looked terrible. Suits fall over, weapons malfunction, and then Tony shows Justin Hammer's attempts, which are even worse because Hammer's sitting right there in the room, trying to look important while his entire company gets publicly humiliated. Tony adamantly announces that the world is years away from catching up to him. Hammer has to walk over to the screen and pull the plug because there's only so much professional embarrassment that he can take. Tony leaves the hearing with the crowd laughing, Stern frustrated, and the government no closer to taking the suit from him. However, after that, when he goes back home, we see that his body is falling apart. The same arc reactor that's keeping him alive is also slowly poisoning him because the palladium core inside of it is leaking into his bloodstream, and every time he uses the suit, it gets even worse. He has tested multiple replacements, but always ends up coming empty. This is when Pepper comes in to talk business, and instead of telling her what's going on, he makes her the new CEO of Stark Industries. Pepper is stunned by this because it just came way out of left field, but they end up raising their glasses, celebrating, and Pepper's got no idea that Tony is basically handing her the company because he doesn't know how much time he's got left. Meanwhile, Yvonne buys a ticket to Monaco because Tony's headed there for the Grand Prix, and before he leaves, Pepper would hire a new personal assistant named Natalie Rushman. Tony notices Natalie immediately because, of course, he does, and Pepper notices Tony noticing Natalie immediately because, of course, she does. Happy takes one look at Natalie and assumes that she's just another pretty face, and then she drops him in the boxing ring so fast that Tony's attraction basically gains a second engine. Tony would arrive in Monaco. Elon Musk briefly greets him. Justin Hammer's hanging around trying to look like he belongs in the same room as Tony, and Christine Everhart is there too, still trying to get a story out of Tony. But then Tony slips away into the restroom because the poisoning level in his blood has hit 53%. So what does Tony end up doing? He decides he's going to drive in the race. Par for the course. Pepper sees his name on the driver list and immediately goes into panic mode because 1 minute Tony was supposed to be here attending the Grand Prix, and now he's participating in it, putting on a racing suit and dangerously stepping into a car. The race begins, the car tears around the track, the crowd is locked in. However, Ivan Vanko walks straight onto the course, arc reactor glowing in his chest, lightning whips dragging at his sides. He swings one whip through the air, and it slices a car clean in half. The entire mood in Monaco changes instantly. Right away, Pepper knows this is trouble, so she calls Happy because they have to get the Iron Man suit to Tony. Ivan spots Tony's car, cleaves it, sends it spinning into a crash. Plot armor on, Tony climbs out. Ivan emerges from the smoke and the fire, whips lashing, clearly enjoying the fact that Tony Stark is powerless for once. But that is when Happy slams the car into Ivan, pinning him against the wall. Ivan would just start cutting through the vehicle while Pepper and Happy are still inside, and it seems like they're in trouble until the suitcase finally falls down, reaching Tony. The Mark V suit opens up and starts to fold around him piece by piece. Despite having the Iron Man armor on and the capabilities to fight, this battle is nowhere near comfortable. It's not easy. He blasts Ivan, but Ivan deflects it, wrapping a whip around his neck. He would even pick him up, throw him, and slam him. Realizing what needs to be done, Tony begins to wrap the whips around himself, forcing his way in, and soon he cuts the power source off from Ivan's suit. Ivan gets arrested, but he doesn't look defeated because he already got what he came for. You see, he didn't need to kill Tony. Tony Stark still loses. He had fought Ivan with his currently most advanced armor, and Ivan still made him bleed in front of everyone. A god with all the resources in the world brought to his knees by a poor man with scraps. And Justin Hammer sees this and smiles. Tony visits Ivan in prison afterward, and he starts making suggestions on how he could have improved his tech. Ivan listens, and then he tells Tony that the Stark family are a bunch of butchers and thieves, that his dad framed his, stole from him, and left the Vanko family with nothing. Tony pushes back, but Ivan's not really there to debate family history with him. So he tells Tony that if you can make God bleed, people will stop believing in him, and even if Ivan cannot kill him right away, he can still make him suffer. Tony would try to leave the room with control, but Ivan is the one who gets the last word in, reminding him that palladium poisoning is going to kill him slowly and that it is a painful way to die. And this is actually one of the rare instances where Tony doesn't really have a comeback. Back on the plane, Tony tries to make Pepper breakfast, which sounds sweet until she sees the egg and realizes he's burnt it somehow so badly that it looks like evidence for a crime scene. She can tell that something's off with him because he's been acting strange even before Monaco, and yet he still refuses to confess. He only tells her that he doesn't want to go home, and what he really means by this is that he doesn't want to spend whatever time he's got left locked inside of his own house watching numbers climb on a screen. Upon his return, he'd start digging into Anton Vanko's past, and Jarvis gives him the official version of the story. So as it turns out, Anton was a Soviet physicist who defected to the US, worked with Howard Stark, and would eventually be deported on charges of espionage. But get this, his son Ivan's record isn't clean either, because he had spent 15 years in prison for selling weapons-grade plutonium to Pakistan. Shortly thereafter, Rhodes shows up. The pressure around the suit has gotten worse because Monaco gave the government exactly what it needed. Tony had just stood in front of a hearing and told everybody that nobody in the world was even close to his technology. And yet, Ivan Vanko just proved him wrong. But Rhodes is still his best friend, and he's there out of concern for Tony. He helps replace the palladium core in his chest, getting a glimpse of what his friend's silently suffering through on the daily. And while Tony tries to keep himself together, Ivan is sitting in a prison with that same calm expression on his face. A tray of food arrives, but there is a bomb hidden inside of one of the rolls. And then a new prisoner is brought into his cell. Oddly enough, coincidentally enough, this one looks just like Ivan. The plan becomes obvious. Ivan knocks him out, leaves the bomb behind, walks out with a key that's been slipped to him, and when the wall explodes behind him, the prison would think that Ivan has died in the blast. 2 guards show up, and then they deliver him to Justin Hammer. Hammer meets him with the smug excitement of a man who just thinks he's bought himself a genius, and he lays out the arrangement pretty clearly. You see, they both hate Stark. Hammer's got a ton of resources, Ivan's got the brains, and together they can usurp Tony. He takes him straight to one of his facilities where he's got rows of prototype combat suits lined up. Hammer talks about military contracts, government approval, replacing Iron Man, and beating Stark at his own game, but Ivan's there for a different purpose. Back at Tony's house, Natalie asks him what he wants to wear to his birthday party, and Tony turns the question around by asking what she would do if it were her last birthday. She tells him that she would do whatever she wanted, with whomever she wanted, wherever she wanted, and Tony takes that answer directly into the worst possible version of himself. The party begins, and Tony irresponsibly puts the Iron Man suit on. He's drunk, reckless, and spiraling in front of a room of people who think they're just watching him celebrate. Pepper pleads with him to stop, but Tony responds by announcing another round and blasting bottles out of the air with his repulsors. And then Rhodey arrives, so she pulls him aside and tells him that something's wrong with Tony. Rhodes watches Tony fire the repulsor again and decides the party's over. He puts the Mark II armor on, comes back up, and tells everybody to leave. Tony just laughs this off, but Rhodes is serious. He tells him to shut it down, but Tony refuses, and suddenly the birthday party becomes two armored men fighting in the house while everybody else has to run for cover. They slam through walls, crash through floors, fire repulsors at one another, and wreck the entire place. Iron Man challenges him, asking if he's ready to be the War Machine. They both fire their beams at one another, and when it connects, it creates this blast that erupts between them. When the smoke clears, Tony is on the floor while Rhodes is flying away with the Mark II. He takes it to the military because, from his point of view, Tony's officially lost control of the one thing that he insisted only he could be trusted with. That party proved that he could be a danger to people, as him doing tricks in the suit is no different than shooting guns at a party for fun. Still, I wouldn't have betrayed my best friend like that and gave something I created to the military, of all things. But the next morning, Rhodes lands at the airbase with the suit, and the soldiers around him start staring at it like it's alien technology that just fell out of the sky. The military finally has one of Stark's armors, and the first person they decide to bring in is Justin Hammer. They want him to add more weapons to the suit. When he sees the suit, he looks almost religious about it, like Tony Stark's downfall has finally arrived, gift-wrapped. Meanwhile, Tony wakes up in the giant donut sign outside of Randy's Donuts where Nick Fury would find him, telling him to come down. Inside the diner, Fury starts speaking to him like he knows everything that's going on, and that's because he does. He explains that he runs a secret intelligence organization called S.H.I.E.L.D. Also, he notices the palladium poisoning on Tony's neck. Then he introduces the woman sitting beside him as Agent Romanov, and this is when Tony realizes that Natalie Rushman was never just a new assistant that Pepper hired. She was Natasha Romanoff, planted inside of Stark Industries to spy on him. Tony doesn't love this revelation, obviously, but suddenly Natasha injects him with lithium dioxide and the visible poisoning begins to clear from his neck. But Fury makes this very clear. It's only a temporary fix. Tony still needs to find a replacement for palladium. However, he insists that he's exhausted all of his options. But that is when Fury tells him he has not. He reveals the arc reactor was not finished. Howard Stark knew it was just the beginning of something bigger, and according to Fury, Howard believed that his son would be the one to complete it. But Tony doesn't want to hear some emotional speech about his father because in his mind, Howard was cold, distant, and impossible to please, but Fury keeps going. He tells him that Anton Vanko was not the innocent victim that Ivan believes he was. Truth be told, Anton worked with Howard, but he tried to sell the arc reactor designs, and once Howard found out that he was trying to do that, Anton was deported back to the Soviet Union where he spiraled into anger, alcoholism, and resentment, until that became the only inheritance he would leave Ivan behind. Fury would also tell Tony that his dad was one of the founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D. He was deeply involved in something this secretive and grand this entire time. Then, Fury hands him a box of Howard's old materials and leaves him with Coulson and Natasha watching over him. Over at Hammer's facility, Ivan's working on the combat suit, but the project is already drifted far away from what Hammer thought he was paying for. Hammer comes in, looks at one of the helmets, and notices that the design doesn't really make any sense for a person to wear. But Ivan tells him they're not suits anymore. They are drones, remote-controlled machines with no pilots inside, no human weakness, no panic, no hesitation, no questions. Justin doesn't know what's going on, and frankly, he doesn't care. The only thing that matters to him is that he one-ups Tony. Moving on to the airbase, Hammer meets with Rhodes and shows off the weapons that he wants to bolt onto the Mark II, going through guns, missiles, and launchers with the confidence of a man selling toys that he has absolutely convinced himself are historic. And then, he pulls out the ex-wife, what he calls the Cuban cigar of armaments, a tiny bunker-busting missile, and he describes it like it's the greatest weapon on Earth ever made. And Rhodes tells him he wants all of it. Later that night, Tony finally opens Howard's box and begins to go through old reels, blueprints, notes, and recordings that his father left behind. At first, it looks more like outdated Expo material, especially when Howard keeps talking about the model city from Stark Expo, but Tony would keep watching, and eventually Howard would speak directly to him through the recording. Talking to him from the past, his dad explains that he was limited by the technology of his time, but that he hid the answer somewhere only Tony would be able to see later, when the technology was available. Howard explains that the model represents his life's work. But then, in the middle of all this science and secret talk, he says something that Tony probably wanted to hear, needed to hear his entire life. He tells his son that he is his greatest creation. And Tony sits with that for a moment, because for years he had carried this image around of his father as somebody who never really saw him. But now, Howard is reaching across time with the closest thing to affection that Tony has ever gotten from him. He rushes to Stark Industries, but on the way he stops to buy strawberries for Pepper, which is a sweet gesture, until you remember that Tony Stark is still Tony Stark, and somehow he bought the one thing that she is allergic to. Pepper's already drowning in the mess that he left behind, dealing with the company, the government, the press, the fallout from his behavior, so when Tony shows up trying to explain what's been happening, the words don't come out right. He tells her that he was dying. He tells her he made her CEO because he trusted her and because he thought he wasn't going to be around much longer. Instead, he fumbles, she loses patience, and the strawberries make the whole thing worse. Tony doesn't get the conversation he wanted, but he does get what he came for. He takes the Stark Expo model apart, and he brings it home. Jarvis scans it into a three-dimensional image. Once the surface details of the Expo are stripped away and separated, it begins to look like an atomic structure. Tony maps it out piece by piece until the hidden design becomes clear, and Jarvis confirms that Howard had buried the blueprint for an entirely new element inside of the Expo model. Jarvis warns him, though, that synthesizing it might be impossible. However, impossible isn't really something that's ever stopped Tony. He starts tearing through the house, building, running cables through the walls, aligning pipes. Agent Coulson also stops by before leaving for New Mexico, and funnily enough, he finds an old prototype of Captain America's shield. You had to have been there to really understand the hype behind this moment when it happened in theaters, but Tony immediately uses it to prop up part of the machine. Once everything's lined up, Tony fires a beam through the house, cutting through the material and focusing the energy into a single point until the new element forms. Jarvis confirms that he has accomplished the impossible. The synthesis worked, and Tony finally has a replacement for the palladium. Meanwhile, Yvonne finishes the drones for the Expo, but when Hammer asks for a status update, Yvonne tells him that they are only functional for presentation. They can't really fly yet, and they're not ready for full combat. Hammer storms in furious because the public demonstration is coming, and his entire comeback depends on these machines making him look like the man who replaces Tony Stark. So he starts taking away Ivan's comforts one by one, the bird, the blanket, the shoes, and he threatens to send him back to prison if he doesn't deliver. Ivan lets him talk until he departs, leaving guards with him. Later, Ivan calls Tony. He thanks him for the earlier advice about the arc reactor coil configurations, and that everything the Stark family took from him 40 years ago is going to take back in 40 minutes. Tony traces the call straight to Hammer Industries, while also seeing that he's hosting a massive public demonstration tonight. He doesn't wait for proper testing. He places the new reactor in his chest, and the effect hits immediately. The new core is an overwhelming power boost, and it stops the poison, so of course, it's time to suit up. At the expo, Pepper and Natasha are in the crowd while Justin walks onto stage. He starts introducing the drones, one branch of the military at a time, each line of machines stepping forward to salute as the crowd applauds. Hammer eats up every second of this. Then he brings out Rhodes in the weaponized Mark II armor, calling it War Machine. For about 5 seconds, Hammer finally has the moments he wanted, until Iron Man appears in the distance, flying straight towards the stage. Tony lands on stage and tells Rhodes that Ivan is alive, and before he can really process that, his armor locks up completely. The guns on his suit turn towards Tony. The drones all lock into him at the same time. Hammer's demonstration turns into a disaster. Tony flies out immediately, pulling the drones away from the crowd as they open fire across the expo. And Rhodes is trapped inside of the armor, forced to chase him while Ivan controls everything. Iron Man has to dodge drones, bullets, missiles, his best friend. Hammer runs to his computer to try to override the system, but Ivan's already locked him out. His entire army belongs to somebody else. Pepper and Natasha corner and press him until he admits that Ivan's controlling everything from inside his facility. So, Natasha tells Happy to drive her there. Pressing on, the drones are wreaking havoc across the city. One of them lands near a young boy and starts locking onto him because he's wearing a toy Iron Man helmet. For a second, the kid raises his hand like he's going to be Iron Man himself, and the drone begins charging up an attack, but Tony drops in at the last possible second. He destroys it and tells the kid, "Nice work, kid," before flying off. Happy and Natasha arrive at Hammer's building, and Natasha would tell him to stay in the car, but Happy does not stay in the car. He gets into a fight with the guard, struggles his way through, finally knocks him down, looks over him like he just handled business, only to see that Natasha has already taken everybody else out in the same time. Tony keeps leading the drones away from the civilians, weaving through buildings while Rhodes is still being dragged by Ivan's controls. Natasha would reach the control room, but he's already gone. So she gets to the system and begins rebooting War Machine from there. Rhodes crashes into Tony and both of them fall into the garden below. Rhodes' weapons would still fire and Tony physically has to force the gun off of him. With Natasha finally clearing the system out, giving Rhodes control of the suit again, he immediately apologizes for even taking the armor in the first place. But there are still drones dropping in, coming after them from every direction. The two of them have to get back to back, and once the drones close in, the fight explodes. The battle ensues, and they tear through the machines until Tony ends the entire thing with a laser, something that can be only used once. Cutting back to Hammer, we see him get arrested. Pepper stays at the expo helping to coordinate the evacuation, and just when it seems like Tony and Rhodes have cleared out all the drones, Natasha warns them that something bigger is on the way. Yvonne arrives in his own Iron Man suit, with 2 upgraded whips and a very heavy frame. Rhodes tells Tony to step back because he's got this, firing Hammer's ex-wife at him. All that dramatic buildup, and the missile hits Ivan, doing nothing. Hammer tech. The two open fire, but Ivan tanks it and swings whips, separating and wrapping them both. Ivan is winning this fight, and he's not even really trying. Both of them are pinned, until they both have this bright idea. A maneuver that they accidentally discovered during Tony's birthday meltdown. They aim their repulsors at one another and fire at the same time, creating a combined blast that explodes. Ivan survives the hit, but he's badly damaged, and once he realizes that the fight is over, he chooses to take everything with him. He activates the self-destruct sequence in his own suit, and every remaining drone across the expo begins doing the same. Tony remembers that Pepper's still out there, so he launches out of the garden, flying straight for her as explosions begin to bombard throughout the area. Pepper is standing on the ground when, just in the nick of time, Tony grabs her, carrying her to safety on a roof nearby, just before the drones detonate below them. The entire expo lights up. Pepper's alive, furious, but relieved. She tells Tony that she quits as CEO because after dealing with everything, she's officially reached her limits. Tony thanks her and they kiss. Rhodes, who was standing there the whole time, flies off with his suit and Tony lets him have it. Later, meeting up with Fury, he tells him that based on Natasha's evaluation, Tony is not recommended for the Avengers Initiative. He takes offense to this, naturally, until he explains that they still want Iron Man, they just don't want Tony as an active member. They want him as a consultant for now. Tony agrees to this, but only under one condition. He and Rhodey have to receive medals, and more importantly, it has to be Senator Stern that gives it to them. Stern hates this level of humiliation, but Tony enjoys every second of it. Worth it. However, then we see Coulson arrive in New Mexico, where a massive crater has been carved into the ground.